what are some of the metrics that we can use to verify and ascertain the integrity of those who are positioning and selling carbon credits in the market? And I'll direct that question to Rotimi, and I'll allow Monica to add on. She has something.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I'll just maybe just list out some of a few of them, and I'll talk more from a perspective of the metrics that people look at in terms of verifying that a project is actually a carbon credit can actually be created out of it. So things such as additionality. So you basically need to ensure that the project that is being an offset or a credit is being created out of is net emissions, essentially it reduces emissions on a net basis. So when you take everything into account regarding that project, it has to be additional, and that has to be proven through the methodology. And the thing is, you actually have to use a verification entity. I gave an example or a standard, and then they have verification entities that I guess will actually go through the process and verify that the project does meet that standard of additionality. Obviously, it has to be real and it has to be measurable. So, when you're working in the solar industry and you're thinking about going into these things, or even some of these gas flowing projects, right? So I think in Nigeria, there's something called carbon limits, as an example. They have a verified process that keys into a global standard. And so when they're working with such entities, you can actually tell them all the steps that need to be executed in order for it to meet like a real and measurable standard, obviously. So for example, tons of CO2 emissions is one very clear, tangible metric that emerges out of this concept of additionality and also making sure that it's real and it's measurable. And then I think I think it has to be permanent. So permanence is something that is also evaluated, i.e., for example, if you're planting a whole bunch of trees in a place that was cut down previously, or if you are protecting a bunch of land rainforest in the middle of Nigeria, it has to be you have to be able to prove that it's it is protected from fire, disease, or anything of that nature, because these credits are supposed to persist for time to come. And then I think just jumping out of metrics, looking also at process, it has to be independently verified. So you can't just voila, I created, I planted a bunch of trees and I've verified it by myself, right? So one of the things that people look at as well is what is the, which verification standard are you using? And I want to double down on the standards points because not everyone's standard is going to get you into the market. And so you could waste your time with working with the wrong entity that maybe cannot, whose standard is actually not relevant. So I think also knowing those standards and the right entities to work with in that regard is important as well. Last thing I'll say is that I'm just thinking off the top of my head and also based on some of the research that I've done looking into the space as well, is I think you have to make sure your projects are uniquely numbered. Obviously they're trying to avoid any, as we say in Nigeria, mago. But you have to make sure that these are unique projects. And there have been tons of issues, right? Like where you see people buying carbon, buying into projects in parts of the world. And of course, people are just double counting and trying to double count. And many big companies have caught in those scandals as well without knowing it. So I think those are some of the things to watch out for in terms of metrics.
All right. Thank you very much, Rotimi, for that. And it's sort of, all the responses are just tying to my next questions. So the next question was going to be is there any organization that is standardizing the measurement of this metrics to be able to say, oh, this project that this person is claiming, can be awarded carbon credits, I'll throw it open to anyone from the panel that wants to respond to that. Monica is smiling like she.
Not really, but I'll just add that it's pretty widely accepted. Like, for example, if you look at the EU regulation that established the emission trading scheme, in the annexes, it's clear how to calculate emissions. So these are really standard things. There's a formula for calculating it, the formula for emission factors, for example. So what we look at is carbon dioxide equivalent. So what is regulated is not necessarily only CO2, but methane and other greenhouse gas emissions. So the emission factors, the oxidation factor, the activity that you're calculating, the formula is very standard on how to calculate how much carbon is being emitted, and also where there might be some maybe some expertise might be needed is in the methodology on how you are tracking it. So those who are giving permits or those who generate carbon and sell credits would have to have a methodology for tracking that this is consistent. Now, if it's forest, for example, you can use the satellite images to see if the changes in the coverage. But if you're looking at, for example, cook stoves, improved cook stoves that use biomass, then there needs to be some methodology to calculate that the improved cook stove is reducing use of firewood, and it needs to be certified. So there are different bodies that can certify, but again, it's a voluntary market, right? So what happens is that you, as the person who is selling or being the agent selling this credit, you need to convince the person who is going to buy from you that your methodology is tight. But if it was in a regulated place like the emission trading scheme of the EU, it's very clear. They have procedure. It's a very developed market. So it doesn't really create a lot of room for confusion.
Yeah, and if I might just add to that, I mean, preparing for this, I basically looked at what we have locally in Nigeria, and I found out that we actually have a civil society and sustainable development network in Nigeria, and part of what they're supposed to do is to sort of verify, provide verification services to those who are sort of providing for carbon credits. And they have a process. I think typically what our challenge is in Africa is implementation. Does this body exist? It does. And I think conversations like this, sort of bring awareness. And I think that's where it starts from, where we basically start to, be more aware as to what is available and what we can sort of get involved with. One of the things we say in my organization is that if people know better, they'll do better. And that's why these conversations are good, getting the information out there, let people know what exists and see, how to go about it. So I'm going to probably type it in the chat, so that we all know this body, and as many of us as want to sort of collaborate with them can actually reach out.
All right. Thank you very much for that, John. Thank you so much. Because
Monica, sorry, is it okay if I just chip in something?
Sure.
Yeah, because I think Monica said something that was very important, and and I had mentioned CO2 emissions early on, but I should mention it's actually not just CO2 emissions. It's greenhouse gases, right? The most popular one is and the one that we're all like crazy about is carbon dioxide, CO2, but there's also methane. So when your cows fart, for example, they release methane, and the production of gas, for example, which we flare a ton of it as well. So people also chase carbon credits in the methane market. And then you also have things like nitrous oxide. And all of them, I think, have their own prices. So it's important to also know that. And then I think the prices vary per market. So I just wanted to chip that in based on what it is.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the contributions. And I mean, a lot of people on the call, as I mentioned earlier, we have founders, we have clean tech entrepreneurs on the call, and they are all looking to see how they can maximize the carbon market for, their various solutions.